Welcome to Roll for Crit. Right now, we're giving you our review of the game Spirit Island from Greater Than Games and or Fabled Nexus and designer R. Eric Roos. This is the game where you take on the role of magical spirits inhabiting Spirit Island. Makes sense. And you're going to be trying to fight off evil invaders who want to colonize and ruin the land. You can see we have it set up before us as a game for 4 players. It does go from 1 to 4. Fully cooperative. Basically, how it's going to work is everybody has their own presence tokens that is going to be in your color, and you're going to be placing them in different areas on the board, and that decides which parts of the board you can affect. So right now, for instance, whoever is using the purple tokens, this guy right here, has a bunch of control over this area, but is going to be relying on other players to deal with these other areas.
Of course, you can spread to different areas, but keep an eye out. The colonists are going to fight back as well. They'll be spreading with either more troops or building towns or cities, which will be very hard to remove from the map.
Yeah, and every round there's going to be a phase where they attack the land. And these are actually your friends, these little huts. These are the huts of the Dahan.
The natives.
Dahan, however you want to say it, I don't know. Made up peoples. And if they survive the round, they'll actually fight back. And that's how you can potentially take out some of these invaders. You also, if they do too much damage, they're going to be adding blight to the land. That's real bad. That is a way you might lose the game, because if you use up all the blight on your little blight card over there, bad stuff happens. You really want to try to get rid of that through actions or just negate that damage to begin with, ideally. You're going to have multiple actions each turn based on cards that you have. Everybody starts with a different set of starter cards, and then as the game goes on, you can use your abilities to gain more. Those cards also have elements on the side, and each role has its own unique powers that have to do with which elements you have on your card.
So you may be able to get bonus effects depending on which cards you play. And one of the big things is each person is very asymmetrical. They all have different abilities and they all build differently. The starting cards will actually have pictures of the back of whichever character you are, which will give you a hint of how to play them. Of course, the board will say too. They will suggest different starting things, so you might be a stronger person on defense or maybe better for the offense.
Another thing we haven't addressed yet in regards to those characters is once you use your presence on the board, you're actually making yourself stronger, which is a mechanic we've seen in a few other games, sort of like Terra Mystica does this, Scythe, where the amount of energy you're going to get each turn, which is your currency, as well as how many cards you get to play each turn, will increase as time goes on. So you're gradually getting this sense of progression, of getting stronger, which is nice. Then there's the fear system, too.
Right. This is the bread and butter, I think, of the win condition for your game. As you're taking advantage of destroying cities, villagers, or the colonists, you'll be generating fear. When you generate all the fear that's on the board, depending on the number of players, they return back to the top, and you'll actually get one of these cards, which will give you a good ability. If you go through enough of them, it'll trigger these little inserts, which actually change the win condition, making it easier to win.
So when it starts out, you've got to wipe out all the invaders, get enough fear cards, and eventually you can whittle it down to just having to destroy one type of them, which in most cases is probably what you're going to have to do, because it'll be tough to get rid of everything on the board, or even 2 types.
Yes, because each round, not only are they attacking, but they'll be building, ravaging, and also exploring. So pretty much they'll be throwing pieces on the board. So one of the big things isn't as much wiping out everything as much as trying to almost corner them to one area and really try to manipulate the board, because you can see where they're going to build next round or they're going to ravage and stuff. So really you got to take advantage of knowing where they're going to hit.
Yeah, planning ahead is a big thing in this game. Communication is key, cooperation, figuring out who should do what and when. That basically sums up the game, I think. We can start getting into our full thoughts. But already, we can say this was on both of our top 10 lists for 2017. So going into this, we're biased in that we like it. But that's not really a bias. One of the things we love, it is a cooperative game. Of course, we've talked about this, the alpha gamer problem in co-op games. A lot of times, either one person can take charge, or it's a puzzle that kind of, once you come up with a solution, the game is sort of solved and there's not as much fun to be had. In this game, we found it does an incredible job of negating both of those issues. Because there is so much happening at once, so many decisions to be made, so many possibilities of when to play cards and how, and that are unique to each person, you really have to discuss all that. There's never one right answer.
Well, yeah, unless for someone who's really good at micromanaging, which we don't know anyone that
If
good.
you're that good, I'm very impressed, I have to say.
But some of the great things about it is because everyone's so asymmetrical, it's not as easy to be like, okay, I know what you should do. Because you'll play completely different from the bringer of the dreams and nightmares.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes on the other end of that, analysis paralysis can certainly be a thing in this game because, again, there are so many possibilities. Sometimes you just have to be like, look, all three of these sound like viable tracks. We just got to pick one and go with it.
Right. But another big thing I do like about this is compared to other cooperative games where there might be a lot more dice rolling or something, a lot of just random stuff that can happen. You're just like, this plan will work unless we roll that. That's much harder for this. The only randomness really is this invader deck and where the terrains go. So it's much easier to plan, which makes it much less annoying to be like, well, our plan completely fell through. More like, oh, that terrain came up. That's not good, but we might be able to work around it now in this. So it involves more, it's much more steering, I feel, instead of just praying the hope that the rolls go your way.
Yeah, absolutely. There's very little element of luck. If you're about to lose, you're gonna know. You're almost always, I think always, honestly, gonna have some opportunity, unless you really screwed up bad, to prevent what's about to happen, to negate it, lessen the effects of it, which is very nice. You never feel like you just got screwed out of random luck.
Yeah, there is, I guess, some randomness too with the powers, but most of them are pretty good no matter what.
That's true.
I mean, you can probably be like, oh, this would have been better if you got it instead of you getting it. Another thing we point out that makes it extremely helpful is on the back, it literally tells you how they play and their difficulty rating and what fits. So you can be like, okay, we got, this guy makes a lot of fear. So we need someone now who's more on the offense or defensive because I'm picking this character.
Right. Yeah. There's a really good variety, and it's definitely easy to figure out. Oh, what's my style? What do I like to do? I might like this character better than the other one. And the asymmetrical nature of it, they're all very interesting. I don't think any of the ones that I've experienced so far have seemed less than or not as cool or even that similar. They all are really cool and unique, and they have really neat designs and artwork.
Oh yeah, no, they're all really cool. I love all their titles. Like that one's the Ocean's Hunger.
Ocean's Hungry Grasp. Yeah.
Right.
They all have cool kind of spiritual, mystical sounding titles. It's not just Bob the Wave.
Another big thing is not only by choosing different characters is your gameplay going to be a lot different, but there's actually ways to edit the game through either scenarios in which they will once again tell you difficulty ratings, what would be good or bad for it, making it a lot easier to. I know some games would be like, let's try this scenario. Oh, it didn't tell me that this would be really bad for people who are better at combat. Like you can plan ahead when you make the game, which is a lot nicer. In addition, they have
adversaries.
Yes, you can actually, because it's like, I think in the rulebook it says alternate timeline sort of, but of actually like the Kingdom of Sweden, England, and they'll have different abilities that will make it much harder to fight them or at least change your strategy.
Yeah, so there's lots of replay value because those will really, if you're familiar with the game, they will really change up some of the rules. Sometimes it's more like the setup, but a lot of times some of the core rules are different.
Right, like you might have been able to get away and when playing the vanilla version, be like, oh, I can just deal with the troops when they do that. They might like, no, they're gonna do this now, and you're like, okay.
There's also, I'm just gonna do this.
Oh no!
I know. If you flip the board over, it's an entirely different map that is not as balanced per se, but is more of a thematic. Would make sense in where these areas would actually be. So if you want a challenge, you can just flip
Right,
this
it
over.
did say that this map's a bit more challenging then, but it does look I mean, it looks like I feel like a Lord of the Rings map. Like,
Yeah, it is also a little harder to read. So I think that's the one you want to wait until you're more familiar with the game to get a grasp on that one. I also want to talk about more in depth about the theme of this game because I think it's really interesting. There's actually a note in the back of the rulebook from the designer about how he was kind of inspired by a lot of other early Euro games that still exist, Settlers of Catan, I don't need to name them, there are almost all of them, which are about colonizing and farming and taking over new territories, and how in none of those games do they ever focus on the potential of people who already lived in this land that you're kind of colonizing and pushing out, which is what every nation has done since the beginning of our history. And to make a game like that is really, that theme is not like in your face or overt, but there definitely is this kind of subversive undercurrent that I really like as a response to those
especially
games.
throwing the fact it's literally, you can fight against the Kingdom of England or Sweden and stuff.
Of course, yeah. And I really felt like, it really does feel like, I've commented while we were playing, you're fighting against an NPC playing Settlers of Catan against you almost.
Right.
It's like you're the other side of the board.
But what is nice though is it makes it more, gives them more power, because as we know, the colonists won in our timeline.
Yeah.
But playing as the actual gods, being able to manipulate the world in a way that's not straight up just the god just bam, done.
Yeah, it's much more interesting in that regard. So love when there's cool themes like that. I also did get a chance to try the solo mode, which also works really well. Basically, it's the same thing as the real game, but instead of all these boards, it's one per player normally. You just have one of these little guys, which is kind of cute. It's like you have your own little mini game to play. It actually doesn't take up that much table space. It works very well. It is definitely more challenging because you're only one guy. People do variants where they play as multiple, which might work better for you. It's also, personally for me, I like to have someone else to bounce ideas off of because I'm very nervous about my choices.
I mean, this game almost, when we did play the multiplayer, it was definitely felt amazing to be like, I can do this when you do. Like, oh, I can do this. So like that bouncing off, this game really rewards that bouncing off.
Yeah, so I think solo mode works really well, but definitely the core of it is in that cooperation. It's a challenging game. But if you like co-op games of any kind, especially kind of pandemic, things of that ilk, but you want something with a lot more depth and a lot more replay value and strategy to be had, this is a great pick, I think. It's got the buzz behind it for a pretty good reason. Now our crits and misses for Spirit Island. On the crit side, the theme really stands out. We loved how different it was, the subversive nature of it compared to most other Euro-style games of this ilk. It pretty much completely solves the alpha gamer problem. There's so much to talk about, so much to think about and do, that you no longer have one person quarterbacking the experience.
Or at the very least, it makes it extremely difficult.
There are lots of unique scenarios and varied options for different player types, so no matter who you're playing with, how many people, you're going to have a lot of replay value. There's a limited amount of randomness in the game, leading to much deeper, more interesting strategy choices. Basically, there's a ton of depth.
Now for the misses, because this game is so complicated, there are a lot of icons to learn and process. This means that you have to often refer back to your reference card multiple times in order to make sure that you understand you've gone through every symbol right or done everything correctly.
Yeah, there's definitely some times setting the game up and relearning things where I had to remember what does this symbol mean and keeping track of how many elements do I have. There's just a lot to take in.
And while this is a pro for some, it is a very heavy thinking game. It can be extremely intimidating for new players, and even for some people just be like, I don't want to have to take in 20 different things.
Sometimes you just get tired. There's a lot to do here. That is Spirit Island from Greater Than Games, and this has been a Roll for Crit review.
Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave some comments down below.
Yeah.